they thought they were burying my wife and inheriting a $30 million empire on the same afternoon. They had no idea that the dusty envelope in my hand was about to strip them of everything. My name is Arthur Sterling. At 73, I learned how fast blood turns cold when money is involved. We buried my wife Eleanor on a frigid Tuesday after 45 years of marriage. Before the soil had settled over her grave, my children were measuring our house for renovations. My son Julian stood by the fireplace at the reception, clinking glasses with investors. My daughter Victoria paced the study with a tape measure, planning which walls to demolish. Her husband Damien was already browsing catalogs for sports cars. Julian's wife Chloe wandered the room, checking the price of Eleanor's antique vases. Not a single one of them paused to ask how I was holding up. To them, I was just background noise, a quiet old man who got lucky marrying a businesswoman. What they failed to realize was the truth behind our family fortune. 40 years ago, I sold my logistics firm to save Eleanor's business from bankruptcy. I poured every cent into her company and built the true foundation of Sterling Enterprise. I stepped into the shadows so she could shine, because I cared about her, not the spotlight. Watching them circle our home like vultures made me realize my silence had raised monsters. 2 days later, we gathered in a cold conference room for the reading of Eleanor's will. The attorney slid legal documents across the table, dividing the operational empire between Julian and Victoria. Then, he picked up a worn manila envelope and pushed it toward me. Julian laughed out loud before I could even reach for it. A dusty envelope, Julian mocked, saying Mom knew I wouldn't know what to do with real money. Victoria added with fake sympathy that they'd give me $1,000 monthly allowance. She handed me an eviction notice, claiming my worn gardening boots were ruining the carpets. They wanted me out of the master suite by the weekend to stage the house for photos. I didn't argue, nor did I shed a single tear in front of them. I tucked the envelope inside my jacket and stood up from the table. As I walked down the driveway, Julian called out from the door, telling me not to forget my keys. I dropped them on the table and kept walking while their laughter echoed behind me. They truly believed they were watching a broken old man accept his fate. That night, sitting alone in a cheap motel room, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a brass vault key, a security token, and a note written in Eleanor's familiar handwriting. I always knew what our children were becoming, the note read. I just didn't want to admit it to myself while I was alive. The shell belongs to them, Arthur, but the soul of everything we built is yours. On the back of the paper were login details, a secret routing number, and a phone number for a lawyer named Mr. Vance. With hands that shook slightly, I logged into the private financial portal on my worn laptop. What appeared on the screen wasn't a modest retirement savings account. It was the master parent holding trust, the true architectural spine of our corporate empire. Years ago, Eleanor had quietly separated the operational business from the assets that gave it value. She had placed all the patents, the corporate headquarters, key real estate, and $150 million in liquid funds into this private trust. Julian and Victoria had inherited nothing more than desks, payroll obligations, and a brand name. I held the master deeds, every single technological patent, and the power to dismantle the entire operation with a single signature. Without even realizing it, my arrogant children were now my tenants. The following morning, I went to a diner down the street to buy a modest breakfast. When I presented my debit card, the cashier informed me it had been declined. Julian, as the newly installed head of the operational firm, had frozen my personal accounts. He clearly assumed hunger and panic would force me to come crawling back to beg for that humiliating allowance. I snapped the plastic card in two, tossed it into the trash, and called Mr. Vance instead. He answered on the first ring, telling me he had been expecting my call for days. A sleek black town car arrived at the motel 20 minutes later to take me downtown. Mr. Vance's office was situated beneath an unmarked building in the financial district, where real power stays hidden. He laid out the reality of the situation with cold precision. The operational company owed the parent trust decades of unpaid licensing fees and back rent. Eleanor had routinely forgiven those debts, but they remained legally enforceable under my sole direction. If I chose to demand payment now, the company my children claimed to own would collapse into bankruptcy within weeks. Mr. Vance also revealed evidence Eleanor had gathered before her passing. Victoria's husband Damien and Julian's wife, Chloe had been siphoning corporate capital to fund private yachts and wild investments. The envelope had been Eleanor's final test for our children. If they had treated me with basic respect, I would have welcomed them into the trust. Instead, their greed had sealed their own fate. Mr. Vance advised against an immediate public lawsuit, suggesting a strategy of patience instead. We would send a routine notice of default disguised as legal paperwork and let their arrogance do the work. While I watched quietly from my motel room, my children were busy building castles on quicksand. Julian put up our headquarters building as collateral for a $50 million personal credit line. He signed a personal guarantee without a second thought, unaware that he didn't own the property. Victoria placed a massive down payment on a luxury yacht using an official corporate account. Chloe went on an extravagant shopping spree, acting as though the company treasury was bottomless. A few days later, our notice of default landed quietly on Julian's executive desk. He barely glanced at the legal documents, dismissed them as clerical nonsense, and tossed them away. By ignoring the notice, my children officially forfeited their legal grace period under corporate law. They had formally defaulted on millions in debt without even realizing what had happened. In Mr. Vance's office, we raised our glasses of sparkling water to toast the silent trap closing tight. 3 days later, the real financial shockwaves began to hit all four of them at once. Julian received an urgent phone call from his senior banker, demanding immediate answers regarding the title. A title search revealed that the company owned neither the building nor the technology patents. His massive credit line was frozen instantly, throwing his ambitious plans into total chaos. At the exact same time, Victoria's luxury credit cards were declined in front of her friends. Her yacht purchase collapsed, and corporate accounts across the entire company were locked down tight. Panicked and desperate, the four of them gathered behind closed doors to figure out an escape route. Damien proposed a reckless and illegal plan to cover their mounting financial obligations. He suggested quietly selling off company hardware, fleet vehicles, and servers to a shady private buyer. They planned to route the cash directly into their private accounts to cover their debts. It was blatant corporate embezzlement, a severe crime that would land them all in prison. Chloe persuaded Julian to agree, claiming public embarrassment was far worse than creative accounting. Julian authorized the illegal sale, signing off on the secret transfer of company property. What they didn't know was that every single transaction was being mirrored live to my parent trust. My children were, without realizing it, carefully documenting their own criminal actions for us. I dressed in the exact role my arrogant children expected of me, wearing faded flannel and worn boots. I walked into the grand marble lobby of our corporate headquarters, pretending to be broken and desperate. I approached Julian near the main elevators, quietly asking for the small monthly allowance he had promised. Instead of speaking softly, Julian raised his voice so every employee in the room could hear him. He mocked me mercilessly, calling me a useless gardener who had simply lived off his mother's success. He ordered security guards to grab my arms and throw me out onto the cold concrete sidewalk outside. What Julian didn't realize was that a hidden digital microphone on my jacket recorded every single word. His public cruelty and verbal abuse were now preserved as undeniable legal evidence for our upcoming court battle. Desperate for immediate cash to keep their lifestyle afloat, Julian and Damien finalized a shady deal. They met an overseas syndicate representative named Mr. Reed in a quiet office to sign over company assets. Mr. Reed slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table for them to sign immediately. Buried deep within the complex legal jargon were carefully written admissions of severe financial fraud. The contract explicitly acknowledged their unauthorized liquidation of assets and recognized my trust's superior claim. Eager to receive quick cash without due diligence, Julian and Victoria signed every single page without reading. They believed they had secured a vital financial lifeline, but they had actually signed their own criminal confession. Watching my own adult children choose deception over basic decency broke my heart all over again. A father always hopes his children will choose honor when tested, but mine chose greed at every turn. The very next morning, 10 forensic auditors arrived at corporate headquarters with a legal mandate. They presented legal authority to seize all financial ledgers, corporate servers, and transaction records. Terrified that their secret embezzlement scheme would be exposed, Julian panicked completely. He barricaded himself and Damien inside the executive suite with an industrial paper shredder. They spent 2 chaotic hours feeding stacks of sensitive corporate documents into the grinding blades. They genuinely believed they were destroying all physical proof of their illegal asset transfers. What they failed to realize was that every paper record was already backed up to our cloud servers. Julian wasn't saving his company. He was actively committing a fresh felony in real time. Still delusional, Julian summoned his hand-picked board members and invited journalists to the building. He planned to spin the audit as a bold corporate, restructuring to secure massive golden parachutes. Julian and Victoria drafted $20 million severance packages before anyone stopped them. Victoria lied blatantly to the board, claiming corporate liquidity had never been stronger in history. Pens hovered over signature lines. Just as the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung wide open, I walked in wearing a tailored bespoke suit that Eleanor had commissioned for me years ago. I was no longer the broken old man in worn boots they had humiliated in the lobby days prior. Beside me stood Mr. Vance carrying crimson legal folders, accompanied by lead forensic auditors. Julian shouted at security guards to drag me out of his building, immediately without delay. Mr. Vance warned the guards that touching me meant assault against the building's legal owner. The guards hesitated and stepped back, refusing to carry out Julian's orders. Mr. Vance dropped the crimson folders onto the mahogany table with a boom. He laid out the truth for every board member, investor, and reporter watching. The operational shell owed my trust over $15 million in unpaid rent. It was in default, and every single technology patent and deed belonged to me. I revealed to Julian that 40 years ago I sold my company to save Eleanor's firm. I chose the shadows so she could shine, and the dusty envelope was her final test. Had my children shown basic human decency, I would have shared everything with them. Instead, their greed condemned them and proved exactly what Eleanor feared most. The board dropped the severance contracts instantly, treating them like poison. Damien frantically examined the syndicate contract they had signed with Reed. It was a legal confession to corporate fraud, embezzlement, and waiver of severance. The selfish alliance shattered as Chloe accused Julian and Damien blamed Victoria. Victoria broke down in tears while Julian sat frozen, watching his empire crumble. Mr. Vance placed an eviction notice on the table, giving them 24 hours to leave. Julian begged to know where they would go, looking up at me with trembling hands. I told him survival is never inherited from a parent. It must be earned through work. I walked out, leaving security to escort my children off the property forever. What followed in the weeks after our confrontation was swift, brutal, and completely unyielding. Every personal guarantee Julian and Victoria had carelessly signed instantly came due. Repossession. Trucks arrived at Julian's lavish suburban estate to haul away his sports cars. Chloe packed her luggage and handed Julian divorce papers on her way out the door. She didn't offer a single glance back as she drove away, leaving him completely broke. Victoria's luxury yacht was seized right at the harbor dock before it ever sailed. Damien filed for immediate divorce from a rented room to distance himself from her fraud, all of their wealthy socialite. Friends stopped answering their frantic calls overnight. Within weeks, my arrogant children were standing on the cold streets with nothing left. They had measured my family home for renovations before their mother was even buried. Now they had no roof over their heads, no money, and nowhere left to run. Nearly a month later, 2 thin figures appeared outside the iron gates of my estate. They were barely recognizable, wearing faded second-hand clothes with hollow eyes. Julian wept openly, gripping the cold metal bars with dirty hands and begging for mercy. Victoria pressed her face against the iron, desperately asking for the $1,000 allowance. It was the exact same insulting bribe they had once offered to force me out. I stood silently on the manicured lawn and looked at them through the tall black bars. I felt no burning rage or desire for vengeance, only a hollow emptiness in my chest. I told them that money offered without genuine love isn't generosity, it is a bribe. I reminded them that 40 years ago, Eleanor and I built our entire life from nothing. We had only our bare hands, our shared sacrifices, and our trust in each other. It was finally time for them to learn the true cost of living and stand on their own. I turned my back on their desperate pleas and walked slowly back up the driveway. I left them standing outside at the very gates they had once ordered me to vacate. Real family is built on mutual respect, loyalty and unconditional love, not greed. Learning to set a hard boundary isn't cruelty. Sometimes it is the only way to survive. Thank you for watching this story on the Revenge Hub. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share with your friends. Make sure to check out our channel for more gripping stories of justice and revenge.